Hey, what's up, high performers and can't believers? Welcome to another episode of the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. In today's episode, we have on the human performance coach of the San Francisco Giants of Major League Baseball. And one of the things that I really loved about the conversation is not only just the uncanny story of where he went from being a professional baseball player to finding himself through his process of anxiety, his process of mental health, and in some ways or another, finding solace in just learning about the habits and rituals needed to not only get him to a point where he was performing at a high level, but now he's teaching professional athletes how to do the same. In this story and in this conversation, we dove into what took him from Major League Baseball into what he's doing now. We had a great deal of vulnerability and a great deal of metaphors that can help you to understand the masks that you wear throughout life and your need to feel authentic and to act in authenticity. And that's something that I know as a pod family that we are all doing that together. And I know it's really hard work. So I am super excited for this episode. Kind of stemming back a couple episodes ago, another professional baseball player turned alpine athlete in Tucker Newhouse. We had this conversation afterwards, and I got to start learning my lesson where I'm just recording the whole time, because a lot of really cool and beautiful things tend to happen when the recording button is off. And he pointed me in Harvey's direction because he felt like, hey, with what you guys are doing with this season of Pivot, I feel like you have to talk to this guy. And afterwards, I feel so thankful that I've gotten a chance to know Harvey. Him and I have had conversations through DMs and whatnot afterwards. And a lot of the things that he's doing with professional athletes, but even more so in his life to navigate his own pivoting and healing journey, I think is such a beautiful thing. So Harv, if you're listening to this, bro, I feel better now that I've had a conversation with you and continue to get guidance and value from a lot of the really beautiful things that you're doing. And it's all centered back into the breath, into stillness, into the present moment. And that's, my friends, is where we are powerful. I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get it. All right, Harv, I usually ask this of people who are in the career field of baseball because it's such a different culture. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm super thankful for you for coming on today because you're on an off day. But you
Yeah.
were just talking about how you've been to every state, and I always, besides Oregon, and I always want to ask like the people that are in the field where it's like, hey, have you gotten tired of the travel and how often you're working yet?
Oh man, I just got asked that question. I still have. I have to
Depends
also.
on the day.
Yeah, I also have to start the podcast saying that I lied essentially because I still have to go to. I still have to go to Maine and Hawaii and Alaska.
Oh,
So yeah.
so you're a
So
liar.
yeah. So I'm a starting off as a liar. No, I have all those on the plans. This is just one I know I need to hit to because I'll get to these other ones. But yeah, other than that, I've ripped through all the states for the most part. So it's been pretty cool. And I don't even know if that's all been. A lot of it's been from baseball, right? Like I lived in Montana when I played with the Brewers for a bit. I lived in Wisconsin. I played summer ball in college in Wisconsin. Lived in Ohio, Michigan. Played college ball in Minnesota. Now I live in California. Obviously, in this spring training, I live in Arizona.
Yeah.
When I played, I used to train and I lived in Florida. My first year in the minor leagues, I lived in Kansas and I was training at Wichita State. So, I mean,
Just
you
all the
just do,
things.
yeah, you just do whatever it takes. Right. And I think now what's interesting about that question now is that I was actually just talking to one of our guys the other day about this. And in the last week, I've been in Toronto, New York, and San Francisco, and those are three of the biggest. Those are
Yeah.
iconic cities in the world. So it's like, you do I get sick of it? That's the question, right? Or do you get
Yeah.
tired
Yeah.
of it?
Yeah.
Do you get tired of it? I think that maybe some people I think for me, beside the actual profession or my resume or if I coach in baseball, one of the things that I love doing in life is studying human behavior. I've just been curious
Oh,
about it. Yeah, I've been curious about it since I was a little kid. And I was able to find a way where I was able to get money to do that. So for me, no, I don't really get tired of it because it was like
Yeah.
it's like obviously going to the games is really cool, and coaching and teaching and being on a team is really cool. But besides that, like I just said, I've been in Toronto, New York, and San
Yeah.
Francisco. So it's like you see three different cities in a week and you get to
Hmm.
see it in real time. And that's stuff that is beyond not just the baseball side, but beyond baseball. That's really important to me. Like you see the city of Toronto and you're in a different country, and then the next day you walk the streets of New York and you see a difference. You see a difference in people, you see the diversities, you see the cultures, and then you come all the way across the country and you're in San Francisco and you see a difference. And I think what is cool about that to me is you hear stories from people or the news about the country or the
Yeah.
world or all those things, but in my experience, you got to go and see the country and the world, and you got to be in it.
Yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, I share that with you. I love studying human behavior and even more so like really connecting with individuals. And so like you and I haven't had a chance to kind of shoot the shit with what we're each doing.
Hmm.
Um, but as a dietitian who specializes in performance and
Hmm.
now is working for Red Bull with their athletes, talent, and dancers, the one thing that I'm finding is that, and this kind of ties into one of your projects that I would love to talk about as we continue on,
Yeah.
that their art is their expression,
Hmm.
and how they perform and other things like that are obviously things that we can go in and help with. But it's really beautiful to kind of see that and to study that behavior and to mold some things that I really value. So, dude, I absolutely love that. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing here too, Harv, that is really special is you're getting to do that in the span of different regions in 3 days. And I think
Yeah.
that part is cool. So
Yeah.
I can imagine the hours are grueling still.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but if you're doing something that you love, you never work a day in your life, right? As cliche
Yeah.
as that sounds, like it's fucking true.
Oh
Like,
yeah. 100%. 100% is true.
God. So I mean, Harv, like you're doing some really cool things, man. I think so. You're the, I mean, what is the title? Human performance coach
Hmm.
of the San Francisco Giants, correct?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's my title. Yeah.
And author of the Breathe, hold on, Breathe, Focus, Excel,
Yeah.
which I have just started reading, which I'm
Oh, right
excited to
on.
continue on.
Yeah.
Dude,
Appreciate that.
beautiful work. So
Thank you.
like your story actually got thrown to me by one of our past guests, Tuck. If you're listening to this, I love you, buddy. Thank you so much for the rec. But he was telling me a little bit of your story, man. I was like, what the fuck? Like, that's
Yeah.
crazy. And I love this because this podcast is all about the hero's journey. It's tapping into
Oh,
the
nice.
habits and rituals of high level individuals, right?
Yeah. Okay.
All the things that like you and I connect with, which is
Yeah.
studying human behavior.
Yeah.
But your story, man, is like I heard it and I was like, yo, I gotta have this dude on. So uh I don't know if this is a slight and it's not meant to be, but it's definitely an unconventional route to where
Sure.
you've gone. So you kind of tapped this into the intro of your book, which I was like, holy shit, this is gold. Um, what was the process to getting where you are today? Because Harv, like it's unconventional. It's like
Yeah.
hero's journey type shit.
Yeah. I appreciate that, man. Uh, it's it's a hard question to answer, and I've been asked this a lot,
Like
you know,
so
and
many times. Yeah.
yeah, and it's hard to answer because a lot of it is really it's so simple, and how I got to where I'm sitting in this chair right now, and where I'll explain, I guess, what I do perceivably for work and how I've done certain things, and I understand it, right? Like I can see it was harder on me when I first got to the big leagues. Like, and I would hear things about myself or what people would think about the job titlement or the growth side of it. And it took me a while to kind of like pull outside of it because I was so had blinders on for so long.
Yeah.
And then when I started writing a book or my first company I sold, and the first company I sold was doing pretty good, you know, and it was like so you had people that you were working. I mean, we were working with the Olympics, WWE, the NFL. Like, so we were consulting across all these. We were with musicians and all this stuff, and then I was coaching in Major League Baseball. And that first year, the Giants won 107 wins, and they set this franchise record. So that first year was like a really weird year for me a couple years ago, because it was like I had these blinders on, and then all of a sudden I was asked that question a lot, and I didn't honestly, I didn't really prepare for the question. Like I didn't like see these things coming. It was like a really unique thing. Like I was very unsuccessful, I guess, in like financial ways and business and status, if you want to say, for like so long. And then out of nowhere, like boom, now you're like the opposite, and that comes with like weird things too, and that comes with things that I also really didn't enjoy. But to answer your question to the core of it, what happened with me was, to the best way. I try to answer this different, because it's fun for me to
It's a hard
answer.
question. Like, dude, tell me your story. It's like there's so much. Like, what do you want to know?
Yeah, there's a lot to it. I think the way I'm trying to answer it right now is the sense of, when I got to college, I got into grad school, and I took a sports psychology class, which is like the consistent story that you'd probably hear on podcasts over the last 6-7 years or so.
Right.
But I got into this grad class, and we were learning about visualization and psychology and how the brain worked. And what was interesting about it was that when I was 15 years old, I was told that this guy, nothing wrong with this guy. This guy was like, "Hey, you're going to play on our JV baseball team." And I was a 15-year-old, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm just not. I'm going to play on the varsity team." And that was like my first memory in sports of like the first time I had resistance, and I wrote a goal, and I visualized being the starting shortstop, and then boom, like I was playing varsity sports and doing really well. But what was interesting about that was, like, I wrote it down and it worked. So as a superstition, I started writing down all these things.
Right.
Yeah. And so that was when I was 15. I'm about to turn 34 in a couple of days. I've been journaling and writing my entire life since I was 15. I mean, I have hundreds of journals.
Books.
And it's just gotten so big. Like, I write every day, and I just, it's what I do, and the reason why I share that is because then I get into this grad class, and I hear about visualization, or I hear about psychology, and I'm like, oh man, that's wild. I've been doing that intuitively for 6-7 years. And now there's like someone telling me this is research driven, science driven, and all these things. So that sparks me, because it gave me it like told me what it I kind of like came out of the shadows. Now I was like talking about this stuff. I was like, oh, I've been writing, I've been doing, and I got excited about it. And then I got signed with the Milwaukee Brewers, and ironically, that was, in my perspective, 2012, 2013 is when mental skills was kind of like turning the corner to being like a job in sports. And people were like, really looking at that like seriously. They were doing it beforehand, but it just felt like that was when there was actual mental skills coaches and all the affiliates, and people were speaking to you at spring training. And so then I saw that was actually a career path, and I was like, oh, wow, like, that looks like that's right up my alley. And so that was really intriguing to me. So now the irony of this, and I'm sure Tucker told you this, and this is in the book, I end up, 3 years later, I end up having anxiety, and I have the yips, and I start, it just was horrible. Like, Tucker was actually one of the guys who I hit him in a live simulated scrimmage. And I knew the whole day leading up to the scrimmage that he was going to hit. And I knew that I couldn't throw to lefties, and I knew I was going to hit him. And the first pitch, I hit him. And then everyone asked to leave the BP. They didn't want to hit off me. And that was the last time I ever pitched. And that was what ended it. So
I'm sure we can laugh at the pain now, but damn.
Oh, it was wild. It was wild.
So that was your last pitch, and it was Tuck. I would hit him too. I'd hit him too.
I got him good, which is the good news. I got him real good. But the irony of that was, so then I get released for essentially my mind, I got signed to play professionally because of my mind. That was like the thing that people tagged me as, like, they tagged you as this mental skills wise this thing and this guy who
Yeah.
can do all these things. And so then I got released, and I was like really embarrassing. And the irony of all that was that when I got released, I was so like confused and didn't really know what was going on. And
Yeah. Yeah.
the one thing that hit me, and I think I'll try to tie a lot of these dots as I'm sharing this story, is I saw a guy who is now one of my dearest friends. He's one of my closest friends to this day, and I saw him, and he was, I don't know if he'd consider himself a yogi, but we'll use this for the side of the story. He's a yogi in this story, right? And he was a yogi. He's doing yoga, doing breath work all the time, and he was at this gym. And at the gym I trained at was all alpha professional male athletes, and I lived with professional alpha male athletes, and we
Yeah.
didn't do yoga and we didn't do breath work. And
Yeah.
so I saw this guy, and he was doing breath work. He didn't know I had anxiety, didn't know I got released from the yips. And I had asked him one day, I said, I saw him doing breath work. And I finally, like, I don't know why this was, but one thing that really struck me deep was I knew I needed to stop being around the same people, as in like pro athletes. And I needed to kind of
Yeah.
re-identify, and I needed to try to get open and outside of my space, which is largely why I believe I had the yips psychologically. It's like
Hmm.
the idea that you are the thing, you are the
Yeah.
character, right? And that was really what happened. So this guy, where I thank him a lot, is he ended up kind of breaking my character. He taught me breath work. He'd have me come to his house, and we would do breath work at his house on Saturdays. And it was just a Wim Hof Tumo style, fast hyperventilative breath
Yeah.
holding. And this was probably around 2015 ish. Wim Hof was I think he had just gone on
Like
like Joe
just
Rogan.
starting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were doing this breathing. And then his girlfriend at the time, now wife, she was from Japan. I don't even think she was speaking English yet at this time, but she was a meditation teacher. And so she would do meditation with me and sound bowls with me, and I didn't know what they were doing, but I
It
felt better.
worked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing this guy would do is he'd tell me to go do cold showers every day. So I would do cold showers. I would go breathe with him on Saturdays. I'd meditate, do sound bowls, and then they were building a wood burning sauna in their backyard at the time.
Hmm.
And it just sort of merged that in these Saturdays we ended up doing breath work. I would bring up a cold tub, we'd sauna, we'd cold, we'd do breath work, we'd sauna, we'd cold, and we'd do this for hours. And I wasn't telling anybody because
Yeah.
it was my own little sacred space. And the reason why this question has been harder to answer, but I'm going to get to the direct answer of it because it's so simple. I was so down and out that I literally would go on these Saturdays and do this day, and it was the only. I would leave, and I'd be like, "Dude, that made me feel something. I feel
Hmm.
happy. I feel
Yeah.
alive. I'm thinking. I'm growing. I'm doing all these things, and I couldn't understand why. But one day, it just hit me where I was like, "That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm going to learn about this. I'm going to study it. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to work. I'm going to make enough money to pay some rent, to eat some
Yeah.
food." But it was just like, it was something where it was meant so much to me that I just committed to learning about it for myself. And then, as fate would have it, and this is where it can kind of go in all these directions, people started asking me what I was doing, and I just started telling them. And a
Yeah.
year later, there's now all of a sudden been 200 people in this guy's backyard. 2 years later, there's now been 500 people in this guy's backyard. 3 years later, now there's investors wanting me to start a company and investing in this brand, and we build this brand up. Now there's been 1,000 people, and it's like it just
Yeah.
kept growing. And then years later it happened, and I was working in Major League Baseball, teaching sauna, cold, and breathwork.
Dude, there's two things, Harv, that I think I'm grabbing from what you just talked about. Is one, you're extremely blessed if you have a yogi in your life,
Yeah, no doubt.
because they are the sage wisdom that you need when you're flying off the fucking handle and
Yeah.
your nervous system is going absolutely haywire because you're really just living life in fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so funny to hear you say that, Harv, because I was just literally talking about this around the same time last year. I was going through a lot of life changes and wasn't really, I was about to have my second kid, about to join Red Bull, which would have been a huge change in just the trajectory of my business and whatnot.
Yeah.
And like I wasn't feeling any of it. I was just super numb. However, I went to a friend that was one of my sage or my yogi, and we did the same exact thing, Harv. Like we
That's
did cold
awesome.
tub, we did sauna, we did uh yeah, it was a really amazing day because it was just all of that and a bunch of journaling. And I came
Yeah.
out with so much like healing coming out of it and feeling. And I think as you're telling that story, it's really cool because like I'm not a planning person, but for season 8 of this pod, like I was like, all right, you know what? I can't do like day of podcast. Like it's just not
Mm.
working. I'm fucking losing my shit.
Hmm.
Let me go ahead and plan before. And I think the cool thing, Harv, that I'm finding, and I think this is perfect too, is that each and every person or guest that I've had on, there's been this theme of pivoting.
Mm.
Like, hey, I noticed that something wasn't right, and I made the conscious decision, and in some ways forced decision to do something else. And I think, Harv, like what you're talking about there is so special. And I guess my follow-up question to what you were just describing right there is like you said to yourself, like, hey, all I want to do is this. I might be
Hmm.
able to pay a little bit of rent, like, but I'm going to figure it out. Like, what was that moment for you? Was it the abstinence of some of those feelings of anxiety and some of the other things, or what was it? I always like to tap into what was that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff I liked. It's it takes me back. You think back to these things, right? I mean, it could sound pretty dark and heavy. It doesn't feel like that anymore. Like this was
Hmm.
years ago, but I mean, at the time, I was sleeping in my buddy's closet. And it's still one of my good friends to this day. But it was like, people hear that and they think a thing, but at the end of the day, I was sleeping in a dude's closet, for a
Yeah.
year and a half. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it is what it is. People
Yeah.
have their thoughts on those on their lives. That was one of the things in my life that was like really frustrating. I had to
Hmm.
try for a minute. I had to drop out of grad school. And not really drop out in the sense of like I left. I just couldn't. I needed some time so I could start getting into tuition and all that stuff,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was working. I was coaching some high school kids and pitching and doing some odd jobs and doing scouting for the Brewers when I could, and seeing where I could get there and there to keep things going. And my buddy took care of me, hooked me up, and let me stay in his closet. And I was there for a year and a half, and just doing a lot of things that it was just a weird place. I was like 27 years old, like I'd just gotten released from professional baseball. I was in grad school. I was killing it like 2 years
Yeah.
earlier,
Like,
and
what the hell just happened?
yeah. And it was like a long period of time. And I remember distinctly, there's probably a lot of moments. There's a lot of enlightening, awakening moments, I think, in all of our lives. The one that's just kind of hit me as you asked me that question that stands out to me was there was a moment where I was journaling. And I remember journaling in the closet, and I was like really down and out this specific day. And I remember writing like, okay, I can do all these things and fail, and my buddy will let me sleep in his closet. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I just remember being like, if this is there's it literally can't really get worse than this. And
Like this is rock bottom.
yeah, this is it. So like my thing was, I just remember feeling that and being like, holy cow, this is the worst my life could get. And it's really not that bad. Like we're gonna go grill out in his backyard after this, and I'm
Yeah.
pretty healthy. Like I work out, like I feel good, like I have things that I enjoy. And the thing when I say the yips and performance anxiety, that is anxiety, like
Yeah.
I had anxiety. So it's not like that was just when I pitched on a baseball field. Sure, it got publicized like that, and
Yeah.
I got perceived as that. But it was like I couldn't fly. I had trouble speaking to people. Like I had anxiety, and when you have crippling anxiety, that tends to lead into a depression, and
Yeah.
then you're depressed and you're fatigued and you're low. And when you're doing those things, you're not making progress. The biology of us is to progress. We need to
Yeah.
be moving. We need to be thinking. We need to be creating, developing. And when you're not doing those things, your conscious space to like think it's not there. So
Mm-mm.
your life is it's closing in on you all the time, and you feel like you can't get anything going. And that was like, I just remember that was like the starting point where I was like, all right, well, this is it for the rest of my life. If I'm just going to be chilling like this, then I'm just going to do what I want to do,
Yeah.
And that was breathing and chilling and taking hikes and reading. And it was all the things I wanted to do. And that's why I say sometimes it gets I'll share this on podcasts that are like longer form conversation. If I were getting
Hmm.
interviewed in a newspaper, I wouldn't share this whole story, right? But
Yeah.
the point is that it was really that simple. Like it was just that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to connect to nature, and I wanted to get healthy. And the healthier I got, things tended to happen.
I mean, that's kind of like where it speaks towards like this whole concept of being an energetic match to some of the things that you want most in life, right? You know,
Yeah,
I'm kind of thinking about just the role of the breath that it's had in my life, and um, I definitely hard want to tap into the science and some of the
sure.
really cool things that you're doing. Obviously, you can share what you're comfortable sharing, but for me, like the breath was such an empowering thing because it gave me a tool and a reminder of all the ways in which my body, my mind, like is gritty. Like
Mm,
I will overcome. And this is empowering to tap back into this thing that is an automatic process, right? We don't really think about breathing, it just happens.
yeah.
But I think with a lot of the work that you're doing, like you're helping people to be thinking about the breath in a different way. So, like, this might be a completely hard question to answer here, but like, what has the breath meant for you?
That's an awesome question. Uh, so, and I think you segued into that question really well too. That teased me up to be able to hopefully hit this for people who are listening. For me, the breath is, I think, and you have to maybe, I'm going to speak to this, and you have to really get your head into the thought of where I'm going with it. Because what I think is that um, we're in this environment, we're in these dimensions, we're in this reality, right? We're in
Hmm.
this thing that we perceive. And we're basically in these platforms and we're playing these roles, we're playing these characters all the time. Like when I'm on this podcast right now, this is not how I'm going to talk to my wife later
Yeah.
today. You
Yeah.
know, I'm in my podcast character right now
Yes.
and I'm
Yes.
performing him. And when I'm done with this, I'm going to take the mask off. I'm going to go chip. Me and my buddy are going to the ocean, and I'm gonna be with him. I'm gonna be with my wife, and I'm gonna talk to
Hmm.
my dog a certain way. And we have an off day, but yesterday when I was at the stadium, I had my coach face on and my
Yeah.
mask. And so, in terms of authenticity of life, to say I am who I am at all times, I'm not going to say that's right or wrong. I'm just saying, for me, answering the question, I disagree with that concept. The
Yeah.
whole thing is the authenticity of being a human is knowing the mask that you're wearing in the moment, mastering that mask, and then having the conscious awareness, which is what I would believe to be the gift of being a human, to take the mask off and shift
Yeah.
gears and go be something else.
Yeah.
Now, okay, well, if that were to be accurate, then what would you have in your control to be able to create the space to be aware enough to move and shift mask in evolve even in a micro scale of your day, a
Yeah.
macro scale of your year? Then you would need to build a relationship with your breathing. And once you understand your own language, your own body's physiology, your own body's psychology through breath, right? And the reason why I say that is because your characters are met with the mind and the body.
Yeah.
Those are your characters, you know. And so, though, if you can step outside of it and study that, now you're playing with these attributes. You're not your mind. You're not your body. You are the breath. You are this thing, this energy that you feel. That's the spirit. That's the soul, right?
Yeah.
And so, if I know that connection, now all of a sudden I have the keys to play the character of my mind, to play the character of my body, and I can play with these things and I can
Yeah.
move them and I can shift them and I can expand them, and I have extreme potential as a human, right? Now, okay, the tough part about what I'm saying, I believe, and this is just based off of observations of me saying this to thousands of people at this point and
Yeah.
see and
Yeah.
getting feedback. The What I believe makes that difficult is that I can no longer tell you what that language is. I can tell you what my language is, and to me, I will be understanding what I say, and it'll be making sense to me what I'm saying about my breathing. I don't believe that you would understand it. I think you can agree, you can acknowledge it and
Hmm.
empathize and go, okay, yeah, that makes sense, or where could this be better? And I think we can exchange that
Yeah.
conversation. But even if you were to start telling me about your language with your breath, I wouldn't understand it either. I
Yeah.
can empathize, I can listen, I can
Yeah.
communicate, I can
Yeah.
question, but I still don't know what you're saying. Um, and so if I were to take a shot at it, because I'll still do that for the entertainment of the
Yeah.
podcast,
Yeah.
if I were to take a shot at what my breathing is to me, my breathing, I can feel when my breath is triggering my body and I can start getting anxious. And
Mhm.
in those moments, like it's usually it's usually a beautiful thing, because typically what's happened historically with my mind and my body is when I feel that thing, it means I'm scared of something.
Yeah.
And typically that it gives me the space to have some sort of tangible breathing practice. For me, it's just really slow breathing through my nose, really quiet. I quiet everything down. I get a little bit of light tunes, no singing, just instrumental. And
Mhm.
in those moments, I try to develop this space, and that's where I implement journaling, because now I can write what it is that's scaring me. Is that something that is rational that I should go into? Because more times than not, I should probably do that, because that'll
Right.
break and I'll never
Yeah.
have that again, you know? And so
Yeah.
once I break the fear, that means my mind and my body's character has evolved. I've improved. And so breathing to me, when it gets fast or my heart rate or I get tense, I can usually, if I feel that days on end, that's typically something in my life that's like scaring me, or
Yeah.
I'm not attacking, or I'm withholding. And I need the journal, because the journal is the communicator that won't judge me. You know, if
Yeah.
I were to say that to you or to my mom or my wife or my friends, they're going to meet me with their own experience, their own perception, their own thing. I don't want
Yeah.
that. I want the journal to get my complete honesty. And
Yeah.
that's when I feel the consistency of poor breathing. And that's usually just a feeling of tightness in my body.
Mhm.
Um, Other things are obvious ones, right? When you wake up and your mouth is somewhat dry, then obviously, have you been traveling a lot? Are you changing environments? You know, you have the environment, every air molecule around you is sending inputs into your brain, your body. So if you're not breathing through your nose, typically, if you're a constant nose breather, now you're not. Okay, if I've been traveling a lot, if I've been in planes, what are things that I can do? Have I been working a lot on the computer? You know, watch people who watch TV. They sit there and go like this,
Yeah.
and they have their mouth open. All right, well, the closer you have an awareness or understanding of the language of your breath, you should feel a fatigue. You should know
Mhm.
that you need to move. You should know that you're tired. You should know that your brain's not operating fast. You're not retaining information. All these things, if you know you're breathing, if you know that you can um, do certain things, then you can obviously, I would imagine you'd have the power to control your realities,
Yeah.
your past, which would be
Yeah.
really powerful. Um, Simple ways to do that are breath tests. You know, you hold your breath. How long can you hold your breath? You can hold your breath typically for 2 minutes, and now
Where
one
are you,
day you can.
hey, where are you at now? Because like obviously, so I do a lot of my breath work practice.
Yeah,
Now it's kind of become my own, but like it got stemmed through the app breath work. So like obviously, I think Wim Hof has the same thing. Uh,
yeah.
my tests aren't great, but I want to know what yours are right now.
Like the
Breath
exhale or the
hold.
holds.
Yeah, the hold and the exhale.
The hold, I'm pretty consistent. I can probably hold. I can hold for 2 minutes every time for sure. I mean, I'm pretty good at two. uh,
Damn it.
I do breath holds with people a lot. I haven't done like my own hold. I usually stop the holds at around 2 minutes,
Yeah.
and I do it with them. So I mean, I would say like sustainably, I hold for 2 minutes or so. Like an exhalation, a CO2 test, which is like my
Yeah.
favorite test. Ideally, I'm like a 90 seconds, like 100-second exhale.
Why
Um,
is it your favorite?
because that to me is the most accurate test on where
Okay.
you're at physiologically. Like if you have a, because the thing is your breath should be really smooth. You should be able to have like these smooth pendulum styles breathing. You should be
Hmm.
very rhythmic, very quiet, and you should be able to do that all through your nose. And then you'll see novice breathers, they can't inhale. Like a common breath practice, like 5 seconds in, hold, 5 seconds out. In a scientific sense, that's like the regulator of the nervous system. When you get into that 6 breaths per minute piece,
Yeah.
you start to control your nervous system. I mean, go watch people who don't breathe regularly. There's a majority of the world cannot take a 5 second inhale. And that's okay. You can change it, but that's part of breath training is that
Yeah.
we're so we're so chronic vertical breathers. We're so
Hmm.
chronic mouth breathers. We're such fast breathers now in the modern world. To breathe for 5 seconds in is a task that you have to be
Yeah.
attentive
Yeah.
to that. You have to be focused to that. And so if you can't do that, that means there's something in the body that's tight. There's a restriction. There's a
Yeah.
barrier. Um, so I mean, when I like the exhale is to be able to control an exhale. An exhalation is what's called it's a parasympathetic tone. I'm just speaking this for people who are listening. When you're
Yeah.
exhaling, you're lowering the heart rate and you're putting your body in this thing called the parasympathetic tone, which is an adaptive state. It's your old rest and digest. It's also like the calm feeling, right? So that's why if I, the money is in the exhale. If I
Yeah.
hum, if I
Hmm.
hiss, if I'm extending these things, that's the calm sensation, right? Now, if I want to upregulate, I would create more inhale. And now I'm going
Yeah.
to raise the heart rate and I'm going to start to heat everything up. I'm going to get this thing going. But if I want to get the exhale and I want to lengthen it, that's really the teller of the nervous system.
Yeah.
So if you can exhale, if you're exhaling 70 seconds regularly, which you should, it sounds drastic, but it should
Yeah.
not be. It's very easy to get there. When you're 60, 70 seconds of an exhalation, and you can control that, no pause, no delay, you can do that all through the nose. Now you know how to move your diaphragm, you know how
Hmm.
to use your breathing muscles, you know how to breathe controlled in a nervous system. You'll feel that in the body. You literally feel your body
Yeah.
calming. So let's say that you have that 60, 70, and now all of a sudden you go to Toronto, New York. We had terrible air quality in Toronto and New York. We're playing in
Yeah. Yeah.
bad air quality states. Now we're flying 6 hours back. You're changing time zones. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
changing sea levels, all that. And now if my exhalation is at 30 seconds, okay, well, what would you do with that information? You would know that your nervous system is 20 seconds behind. It
Hmm.
probably isn't. Let's go to the principles. Probably not sleeping, breathing faster. How's your nutrition? Where's your movement been? Where's your social connection? If all those have a
Yeah.
leak, if one of those has a leak, you're going to feel that in the exhale. I think the hold you can manipulate too much. I can hyperventilate and get a longer hold. I can do some prep work. I can manipulate the hold. I don't think you can manipulate the exhale as much.
No, can't fake that funk, man.
Yeah,
Like,
so that's a good teller. That's a teller. If you come back and all of a sudden I'm exhaling at 30 seconds compared to my 60, well then this is where you got to be the rational, intelligent human. You got to really comprehend the whole stoic philosophies of doing less and getting more. But what we do very often, this is a general observation, is we push past that and we artificially find a way to work harder still without understanding the characters of the mind of the body. And eventually that breaks, whether it's an anxiety mentally
yeah.
or injury physically, the system breaks. And if we go full circle here and I pull it back to me for a second, that's where I would say anxiety and the yips came from years ago.
Yeah.
Is I was an unbelievable suppressor. I was able to suppress things and hold them down, and I was able to push through and grit my way through things for unbelievably well. I
Yeah.
still can. And then that came out in a massive performance anxiety because the system could no longer suppress. It broke, and now all of a sudden you see it in these panic attacks or these,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? And that's what I think happens to us.
So I have the ability, Harv, to mark clips, and I just marked like 10. So you mentioned earlier, like, hopefully I can knock this out the park. Bro, you did. Like, I'm
Well,
kind
I
of.
hope that makes sense.
It does. It does. You had talked a little bit earlier about the masks and how, like, another person could truly empathize, and I really love that analogy. And I'm wondering for you, like, you've been able to work with some very high level performing individuals. Are you taking that same analogy with most people? Because, I mean, if we look at it, like, yes, if you're an elite level athlete, you have the performance of your craft, but then you're all of these other pieces that make you that whole human. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, when you're coaching an elite level person through this, are you kind of taking that same analogy with helping them to understand that this is just one aspect of you and how you need to perform so that they can go out and do the other things? Or like, how does that process work as you're guiding them?
Yeah, I used to get intimidated about putting that into my teachings. I've had a lot of things that I've been intimidated to share with people, and I think that that's a good thing. The mask, the mask comes, the way in which it came to me was from it was a Stoic philosophy, and the way in which I understood the story was the Stoics used to, obviously these were like in Shakespeare days when they would
Yeah.
run plays and they would do entertainment. Um, they obviously wasn't that many people and they all had their specific things. So, and I might be exaggerating this a little bit, but I'm turning this into my own story. If the
That's cool.
if the blacksmith is the blacksmith and the cook is the cook and the owner, the emperor is emperor, or whatever. Well, the actor is the actor, and the actor of the Stoics back in the day had to play a play by themselves. So they'd have multiple masks, and they'd have all the masks on the stage. And the character, the person who was playing the play, would come up, and they would put a mask on, and they'd be happy and go lucky, and they'd be the hero. And then they'd put the mask down, and all of a sudden they'd be the villain. And the way in which the Stoics tell the story is that they would obviously have to change body language, tone, and do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And that was their thing. So if there was 15 characters in the play, the one person played all 15 characters,
Yeah.
right? And that's what actors do today. They go into their. That's what Jim Carrey talks about a lot. He talks a lot about how he became the characters, and that was his depression was his avatar because he didn't know who Jim
Yeah.
Carrey was. So to funnel that into the question of, do I teach that now? Yes, absolutely. I teach that to anybody and everybody. Not for me. It's just hopefully I can give them a foundation and then they can make it their own. And the reason why I think that's important is because yes, you are a baseball player, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that if you can see your baseball player as a character and the fact that you've mastered it, now all of a sudden your ability to logically make decisions drastically improves because you know that it's the character. So if we're at Major League Baseball or the NHL, there's people who are at the show. It's the same thing in the Roman Emperor,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
they're at the show. Like the fans are watching the character. They're not watching you. They're
Mm-hmm.
watching the character. And so your character plays this role and the media builds that role up and the show must go on, but
Yeah.
when you take the jersey off and the hat off, like you're not the character. Kevin Hart talks about this all the time. He can't go out in public and have a coffee without someone wanting him to tell him a joke. But it's
Yeah.
because Kevin Hart's character to us is that. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
him. I know his character.
Yeah.
So if I were to meet Joe Rogan, I would want Joe Rogan to be high on a podcast with me, and I'd want him
Yeah.
to tell me some crazy things about aliens because that's what
Yeah.
his character is to me. I have no idea who he is,
Yeah.
and it's the same thing why I'm saying this. Like a lot of times when I first came up, when I was first coming up, and I was telling you this earlier, when I was getting perceived as things as a breathwork coach. I'm a breathing coach, so now I must be the most calmest monk, person in the world. Well, I still have to do all those things,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so the character that I play, yeah, it works. Like if you want me to throw a speech at you and give a presentation to a company for 45 minutes, it will
I'll do
work.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, and I have a speech that goes 45, and I know when you're going to laugh, and I know when you're going to sit there and think, and I know when you're going to ask me the question, and I've been doing it for 12 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's like, I know how that character looks, and I know what that character plays at, and I know the value for that character, and I know how much it needs, if it wants to get valued at more, it needs to get a little bit better. It needs to make that
Yeah.
joke a little bit crisper. It needs to
Yeah.
change that language. And so what I'm trying to say is if you have the conscious ability to always step away and study your character, I think that in performance aspect, your performance actually drastically improves because you would
Mm-hmm.
look at, your baseball player, your hockey player, and you would study it rationally. You would watch it rationally, and that's an incredibly hard thing to do because you are a
Yeah.
human and there's
Yeah.
emotions. But in a logical way, I think it plays psychologically extremely well for anybody in any profession.
I know that. I mean, you're kind of in it right now, Harv. So I'm sure that your vantage point is far greater than mine. Um, I'm starting to see mental skills coaches across different platforms. I know that we just had the Red Bull mental specialist on who works with our athletes a couple seasons ago. Obviously, I know Justin Sua, who has made a really big name for himself out of the Rays. So it's a new profession and one that I'm really excited to see grow.
Mm-hmm.
Harv, where do you think this goes? I mean, you're a very visionary type of individual, and it's so funny that you mentioned Jim Carrey. 'Cause I literally just watched the Jim and Andy
Oh
bit
yeah.
that he had, and then I literally just did episode 1 of Arnold, and both of them visualization. They both talked about that. They both talked about like, hey, I didn't know what it was going to look like, but I knew to some degree that this was it, and it's happening. So like someone like yourself who's a visionary, like where do you think this goes?
Wow, that's a cool question. So I don't know if I can speak to the scale of it. I definitely think that because I have an idea of where I could maybe have an idea of where that would go, but I think in terms of visualizing or how visualization would work at large scale for all of us is that I think the gift of the human mind, the consciousness, is that we're always in the future, right? So if you
Hmm.
just think about this in a very like logical strategic sense, the power of visualization, it gets this concept of like a woo woo, which is fair, I get it, but everything is woo woo, so this one just gets the tag of it. That's kind of what breathing was, right? Like this is woo woo, and now all of a sudden, like how do I like they're asking
Yeah,
about it, and it's like,
yeah.
okay, well, everything's woo woo, so let's get past that and let's think about it. So if we talk about visualization and we think about the brain, for what we think we know about the human brain, is the one thing that separates us from all species on the planet is our ability to solve problems. We have this
Hmm.
frontal lobe that allows us to communicate and critically think and be rational, that is so further advanced than any other animal on the planet, that we're able to build skyscrapers and avoid the lions. Like we're able to
Yeah,
do all these things,
yeah,
and then we're so smart that we have to create rules and structures so that we all play in the game together.
yeah,
We
yeah,
have to stay here, and so we create morals and we create rules and systems, and we're always evolving, we're always adapting, and we're always advancing, and all these things, right? Well, so okay, as an individual, what could you do with that information? The thought would be that if I can think in the future, I can think 6 months down the road from now, this is where I want to be. I always had a vision of coaching Major League Baseball, always,
yeah,
right? I wanted to be in the big leagues. I wanted to see it. I wanted to feel the show, honestly, for my
yeah,
own
yeah,
sense, my own life. I wanted to see what it was like. I wanted to
yeah,
feel it. And so you got to start thinking like that. So now if I project that out in the future, I got to give it some sort of timeline so that it's real. And then what's really fascinating about how our brains work is that now all of a sudden, if I can see that out in the future and I'm conscious about that, the unconscious behaviors naturally start to form in you, and you start to
hmm,
become that person. You start to think and say, and you have the blueprint comes to you. That's where I think every person on the planet is a genius. So when you said, Harvey, you had an unconventional way, I agree with you. I know that that's accurate. Everyone can do whatever they want to do.
yeah,
There's an
yeah,
unconventional way because it's unconventional because you're the genius. You're the thing. You're the
yeah. You're
source.
the
And
artist.
so,
Yeah,
yeah, you're the artist. So now all of a sudden I can put that out into the future. I can consciously do that and decide and believe in it, and I can manifest it. My behaviors, my unconscious behaviors, the blueprint comes to you. That was what I think is the manifestation, is now how did I create this blueprint and know how to do it? You knew how to do it because your brain is so smart. It's such a computer that it starts putting the pieces together. And it
yeah,
goes, okay, I got to go this way, I got to go that way, I got to go this way, I got to go this way. And you do all these things. And then all of a sudden you have it. And I call it just the time delay. It's just a time delay until you have the actual thing. So if you forecast and say, okay, everyone in Major League Baseball is going to be a human performance coach in the next 3 years, well, that probably will happen. It probably already has happened,
yeah,
you know? And so,
Yeah.
that's just going to start to take place, and we will all form unconsciously to the movement.
Yeah.
And that's just how all things happen. And if you want to get even closer in short scale, even in conversation, to think how much our brain lives in the future, whenever you're talking and asking a question, I'm listening to you and I'm trying to be as present as I possibly can, but I'm already in the future preparing to answer it.
Yeah.
So I'm even in the moment of our psychology. Our psychology is, even in its littlest sense, it's always just a little bit in the future.
Dude, this is perfect because it kind of, I told you beforehand, I was like, hey, I don't pre-write questions, but I lie.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to end being a liar, full circle. You started with
I
a
love
lie
it.
and I'm going to
Yeah.
end it.
A lying
Um,
podcast. I love it.
I do have two questions that I do ask all of our guests, and it's so fucking perfect that you just teed that off because one of the questions that I like to ask is obviously this is the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. So, Harv, have you made it? And if not, what does making it look like for you in your current stage as we look into the future? Go ahead.
Have I made it? Oh man. I have made it. I have made it to the past visions that I had. So I'll say it
I
like
love
that.
that.
I have made it to those. And then the second part is,
Yeah,
what was the second part?
what does making it look like for you?
Oh, what is make? Okay, so that was the first. That'll be my first answer. Is I
Okay.
have made it to the past ones because those are now dead. You know, I have to
Yeah,
kill
yeah.
those off now. Those are now irrelevant to me.
Yeah.
Now the future. I have to hear it one more time. Say it one more time.
Yeah. So obviously this is the Can't Believe I Made It podcast.
Yeah.
So Harv, have you made it? And if not, what does making it look like for you?
What does making it look like for me? That is such a cool question. I wish I had an answer. I don't think that I will ever. I don't think I'll. And maybe I'll change and then change again. I'm sure.
I mean,
But
we'll have a part two. I mean, you kind of just
yeah.
gave me the okay. Like, all right.
Yeah. I don't think I'll ever make it because there's too many things that I continuously learn about myself and learn about the world that are they're too awakening constantly, and they're too exciting. And the thought of, I just don't think I could ever do that. I don't think I could ever get to the completion of it and say, oh, I've made it, or this
Yeah.
is it. Um, it's kind of that. Well, I guess if we're going famous characters, this Matthew McConaughey has that line where he says, "My hero is me when I'm 25," and then he gets to be 25, and he
Yeah.
goes,
Yeah. Yeah.
"My
Shit.
hero's 10 years ahead," and he goes, "I'm never
Yeah.
going to meet my hero." I think as I've gotten older, I find that to be rather true. Um, there's just too many. There's too many things to be curious about, and there's too many things to kind of suck at and figure out how to suck less at them. And
Yeah.
there's just a lot of that stuff that I don't think I can. I can't give you an answer.
I love it. Well, I mean, it kind of just gives us entry point for a part two at some point, Harv. So if you're cool with it, I would love to send an invite over here in the next couple of years or so. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, Harv, I absolutely appreciate you taking the time, man. Very last question for you, so you can go
Mm-hmm.
off and get some beach time. But where can people find you? How can we support you? What sort of things you got going on? We didn't even get to fucking art of something. We'll get to that in part two. But yeah, how can people support you, man?
Yeah, you can. My handles are Harvey J Martin on like all my personals. My book is Breathe, Focus, Excel. We just created a Instagram for that. I don't know if I'm sure there'll be more that comes out on the socials. And then the Art of Something is a new company I started last fall. That brand will start to go a little bit more. We've been, for the last 6 months or so, we've kind of been developing like the foundation of what we're going to do with that. And there's a pretty decent sized group of people who are pushing that forward. So I think you'll see a lot of movement on that pretty soon. But basically, the whole concept of the Art of Something is, it's what we've been talking about. It's like the reason why it's called the Art of Something is because I don't know if I'm wasting your time now. I know
No.
for the length of it, but the Art of Something, where I came up with that name was because kind of what we've been talking about this whole podcast. I had always when you are someone who's unconventional, so I'll give you guys a little, for the listener, I'll give you a little feeling of what it
Yeah, yeah,
feels like to be unconventional. When you are unconventional, in the resume world, if you will, or you
yeah.
don't have massive credentials, or you don't have all these things, you are met with an unbelievable amount of scrutiny and criticism and critiquing. And if you, in a way, you have to be on top of your stuff. Let's put it
All
that
from
way.
people outside the arena, mind you, too, right?
Yeah.
God.
So I've been, I spent 10 years when I wrote my book. I wrote it about breathing. Everything is science based. It's all research driven. And I did that in grad school, and I did that growing up, and I did that with my first company, and everything was based off of science research, and it was always challenged and all these things. And what I came to in the last couple of years was this concept that I fell absolutely in love with, and it was just the duality of life. If we make anything in life that's objective, that you can see, touch, and feel, it has to have a good and a bad. And the only most beautiful moments of my life have been in the middle of that, which I've never been able to define or tell or share with people. I can feel it, and
Yeah,
the energy of that has propelled me into something. And so I just have called that the art something, because I don't know if it's good or bad. I don't know if what you're doing is good or bad. Now I can judge it, and I can be a human, and I can
yeah,
get insecure and compare and do all these things. And that's what makes life so great while
yeah,
we live, is that we have these dualities. But everybody, and my opinion, knows that at the end of the day, the most beautiful things you can't define. They're subjective. It's art, and
yeah,
it's the art of something. And
yeah,
so the whole concept of the art of something is we'll have retreat spaces. Right now we're looking at Houston, Scottsdale, and LA will be our locations. Um, and we're going to run retreats where we'll run through a bunch of breath work, a bunch of heat and ice, a bunch of journaling, a bunch of conversations, a bunch of prompts that I'll kind of run people through to kind of get you into those headspaces that get you thinking creative and develop
hmm,
your own art. And so
yeah,
that's what the art of something is for. And then Breathe, Focus, Excel is just my book, and everything that has to do with sauna, cold, breath work, grounding, nature, those sort of things.
shit. Man, I feel fulfilled having just had this conversation. You've been able to unlock that whole concept of really loving human behavior and getting to connect with like-minded individuals. So, Harv, man, I absolutely appreciate you taking the time, bro. I know it's an off day for you. I know you're probably
Yeah, thank you.
getting into the mix. Hopefully, you get a good break during All-Star break here coming up.
Yeah.
But man, such a pleasure connecting with you, bro. Thank you so much for taking some time.
Likewise, I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
Awesome.